Hello, Jimmy Dore, comedian, broadcaster, fearless warrior in the defence of the truth. I'll tell you, Jimmy, it's always a reassurance to me just to hear the sound of your voice. It cheers me up, and God knows the world needs some cheering up. So thank you for being with me.
Likewise, very much so. Great to be here.
To get straight into it, Jimmy, I watch a lot of your content. I'm kind of across your opinion on a lot of things. That said, whose country, yours or mine, US or Britain, is in the worst state at the moment?
I think it's neck and neck. I wish I saw your prime minister give a speech the other day decrying the open borders policy and that this was done intentionally. It wasn't accidental. And then I saw a video of him from 2020 advocating for that very policy that he was decrying. So I don't know what the game is that he's playing, but it seems like the same people are running both countries, and it isn't the politicians. And it seems like they're working for the people who are actually running the Western world. And right now, what's happened in Syria is almost the exact thing that's happened in Israel, that happened in Libya, that happened in Iraq. I'm sorry, that happened in Libya. It's happened in Syria now. It's got to do with Ukraine, and it's the same people doing all these things. And much of it is at the behest of Israel, and we don't really control. I try to tell people that there is a cabal. There's a handful of billionaires that really run our country. And they're like, oh, really, Jimmy? What do they have, secret meetings? And I'm like, they're not secret. It's called the session of Congress. And, whenever those people get together, do you really think they're doing the bidding of workers and students and the elderly and regular people? They're doing the bidding of the handful of people that actually run things. Right now, they're doing a funding bill in Congress that is going to preclude Donald Trump's FBI director or attorney general from investigating the January 6th commission. They're not going to allow an investigation, which, of course, when you don't allow investigations, that means, of course, you're guilty of something. And so we're run by criminals. They're all doing insider trading in our trading on the stock market. And it's all wide out in the open. Nancy Pelosi's outperformed the market for the last 10 years. Everybody knows this. So we're run by literal criminals, and they don't care. But they're hollowing out our own countries. And one of the things that they're using to do it is exactly what your prime minister was talking about: open borders and flooding countries with the desperate immigrants that we create through our war policies or we create with our economic sanctions. And that creates chaos so that people are fighting amongst each other so they can't come together to oppose the establishment. That's my theory, and it seems to be playing out every day. So that's a long answer to your question. I think we're in real bad shape. In fact, right now, Germany's economy is on the brink because they can't get cheap energy anymore from Russia. And the fact that Germany and Europe goes along with NATO, the CIA, and the United States is mind-boggling.
You mentioned, the same thing happening in Syria now that previously happened in Iraq, happened in Libya, happened in Somalia, happened in Sudan, leaving only Iran to sort of complete a set of 7 and so on and so on. If we are talking openly and quite knowledgeably about a US foreign policy stretching back 3 decades, at what point do they realize we're going to have to try something different because we're being watched? If we are talking about what all this means and interpreting it in this way, you and I, at what point do the people who notionally run things realize that they've been rumbled?
I think they're going to keep, pedal to the metal, doing in fact, they're really going nuts before Donald Trump gets in office to try to cause as much chaos and destruction as they can. And I don't think there's I think they have most of the people in the United States snowed. People are cheering on the Syrian destruction and the overthrow of their government. They don't realize that Al Qaeda is literally in charge of Syria right now, and it was funded by the United States and Israel and Saudi Arabia, and they think that we're the good. They still think we're the good guys. So I think my answer to that is I think the propaganda is still working, which is why. They still everything's going the way they want it, which is chaotic, and things are only going to get worse. It seems.
What? Well, amongst many things that trouble me, Jimmy, it troubles me that what this sequence of events seems to be demonstrating is how vulnerable and gullible so many people are. So many of us have been. You know, if you've been tricked by a close-up magician, you know, doing a bit of sleight of hand, you know that you can be tricked. No matter how smart you are, no matter how well educated you are, you know that just a little bit of prestidigitation and you're fooled. And they can do it again 5 minutes later. And yet, despite that self-knowledge, so many people are simultaneously fooled again and again and again by what is essentially the same trick of propaganda and nonsense being fed to us all the time. Is it cognitive dissonance? Is it willful blindness?
You know, it's funny. I just tweeted out something that speaks exactly to this point. There's a video revealing the Al Qaeda fighters and the rebels in Syria handing weapons over to the Israeli army, and it's like they were never. This was always a scam. They were always working at the behest of Israel in part. And it seems like human beings they're born programmed to believe pro-war propaganda, no matter how much. I mean, I thought after Iraq we would be done with it, but of course we weren't. We fell for Afghanistan occupation 20 years, which the Afghan papers reveal was one lie after another lie after another lie. And as Julian Assange taught us, the wars aren't meant to be won, they're meant to be ongoing. And so then the same thing happened in Libya, the same exact thing. And now, you're right, all Sudan, Somalia, Yemen, here we are. In Syria, and people feel good about it. I really I hate to be a cynic, but my cynicism can't keep up with reality. And I've done, you know, you're doing a great job to wake people up. Tucker Carlson is doing his part. The Gray Zone, shows like mine. There's a handful of people out there that are trying, but of course. We're the ones who are discredited. We're the ones who are marginalized. We're the ones who the algorithms work against. And I have hope for humanity. I don't have much faith.
My wife insists that the species Homo sapiens is splitting into at least two separate groups at the moment. And that it's like we're two trains, you know, on parallel tracks, and now the tracks are taking us in different directions, and we're getting further and further apart. Do you think there's anything in that? Do you think there are simply people who by nature are just going to, no matter what evidence is put in front of them, will just go along with the latest thing? You know, while another group that's growing steadily, I don't know at what rate, but it's growing, has gone off in another direction and now just looks at everything official and says, well, that must be nonsense.
Well, I don't have to guess. I've experienced it. We've all experienced it since the COVID. And no matter how much evidence is put in front of them that they were lied to about COVID, and it wasn't lied to about one thing, they were lied to about everything. They're still mad at Joe Rogan for telling the truth about things like ivermectin and early treatments, yet they're not angry at Anthony Fauci, who we all now know is the guy who funded the gain of function research that created that virus. That they all admitted he lied to Congress twice saying he didn't fund it. And now we know for a fact that he did. Even the NIH admitted it, that they were funding gain of function. But they're still not angry at Anthony Fauci. They're still angry at Joe Rogan because that's what they were told to be angry at. So yes, no matter, and people who consider themselves smart, the liberal class in America, the Democrats, the liberals who I grew up with being, they consider themselves the smart ones, and the conservatives are the backward redneck dummies. And yet, here, no matter how much information you give them, they can just ignore it, put on blinders, and they're allergic to the truth. It's amazing to me. And by the way, there's nothing liberal. So the propaganda and the people's cognitive dissonance have turned them from liberals to the opposite of what a liberal is. A liberal is so now they're for. I saw it used to be for freedom of speech, used to be anti-war, used to be for bodily autonomy. Those are three hallmarks of being a liberal. Well, the liberal class, they still call them liberals, even though I call them the illiberal class, because there's nothing liberal about being pro-censorship, which they are, and that is the hallmark of authoritarians and dictators. Yet they call someone else a fascist. That is fact. They're against bodily autonomy. They were all for mandating experimental medical treatments, which we now know didn't work anything like they said they were. And now we know they have unbelievable serious adverse events. Papers are coming out every day telling us that. So they're against bodily autonomy, and they're all pro-war. They're pro-war in Syria. They're pro-war in Ukraine. Which is the exact same thing as Iraq, which is the exact same thing as Libya, they're not liberals anymore. They're illiberals, and it's a cult. It's cult-like thinking. It has every hallmark of cult-like thinkings that they never question. They don't want to question authority, and if you do question authority, they're there to push you back in and shame you and push you out. I mean, that's why I remember, Elon Musk was such a darling of the quote unquote liberal class because he was making electric cars and it fit into their climate change narrative. And then as soon as he wanted to give a little more, not 100% more free speech on a social media app, they completely flipped on him, turned him into a demon because he wanted to actually be liberal. So this is I do think that there is a division, there is a divide. There are the people there's the woke, and then there's the people who have awakened. And hopefully more people awaken than are woke, and we can save humanity. But I don't mean to be too pessimistic, but the people who are running things are psychopathic. And that's not a hyperbole. That's not an extreme. They've been planning this stuff for decades. The prospect for a new American century. We've all saw people, maybe they haven't seen the video of General Wesley Clark in 2007 saying after 9/11, he was told in the Pentagon that they had a plan to go in 7 different Muslim countries in 5 years. And here we are. The last one left is Iran, and they're ramping up for a war in Iran, and Syria was a part of that. So if they could blunt Russia's protection of Syria and Iran, they can have an easier shot at it. It seems inevitable that they're going to try to decapitate Iran and turn it into chaos like they've done to Syria, Libya, and Iraq.
I watched you on your channel talking about watching Piers Morgan, UK broadcaster, talking to Jeffrey Sachs, political analyst, sometime advisor to the UN Secretary General, a very knowledgeable and experienced individual. And Piers asking him if he really thought that the CIA had launched faked a chemical attack, and Jeffrey Sachs actually threw his head back and laughed and said, "You bet I do." And you then went on to suggest that he might be an example, that Piers Morgan might be an example of somebody being stupid on purpose. And those 3 words fairly stuck in my head. I wondered if you could develop that thesis for me. Stupid on purpose.
Well, there's that old saying that it's hard to get a man to understand a situation if his paycheck depends on him not understanding it. And that's Piers Morgan, right? I mean, he's fallen for every hoax in the book from the CIA, the MI6, and the establishment. He fell for COVID, hook, line, and sinker. He fell for the Ukraine war, the Syrian war. I mean, I'm sure he was on board for Libya. I wasn't watching him back then, but I'm sure he was. There isn't a thing that he hasn't fallen. Russiagate, he fell for Russiagate. He calls, when they called the truth about Ukraine Russian propaganda because they're told to do that. So, and he brags about that he, got a degree in journalism. That there's two types of people who go to journalism school: dupes and shitty journalists. So, anyway, so yeah, it's.
But is it that the stupid on purpose? As I say, it goes round and round in my head. Is it some kind of self-preserving expediency? And I don't, to broaden it out from Piers Morgan, a single individual. He's just an example that by dint of your channel came before me. Is the journalist class or the journalist profession, is it completely dominated by people who just operate out of expediency? They will just trot out whatever is the narrative, regardless of any relationship it has or hasn't with the truth, until it becomes expedient, politically expedient or professionally expedient to trot out the next thing, which would suggest that there's no such thing as journalism anymore. It's just glove puppets mouthing words that are fed to them by someone we don't see.
Well, the journalism class I know in the United States, well, it used to, people who were reporters used to come from blue-collar backgrounds. They were usually cantankerous and with, pointy elbows, and they weren't looking to make friends with the people they were reporting on. They were looking to expose the elite, the rich, the establishment, because they had real contempt for them. Well, now, in 1996, Bill Clinton passed the Telecommunications Act, which took the United States from 50 giant media companies, already 50, they consolidated them down to 6. And so every TV station, every radio show, every magazine, everything comes from 6 companies. So now they have complete control, and they don't get their reporters from blue-collar backgrounds anymore. They handpick them from Ivy League universities. Why? Because they know they're going to be class loyal. And I remember, and they are, right? So the guy that Jeff Bezos at the Washington Post chose to cover progressive politics in the United States is a guy named Dave Weigel, who used to run went to Northwestern, was the editor of his college newspaper, and did pro-war Iraq war rallies while he was so they don't have to give these people much direction. They don't have to give them direct orders. They're choosing the people who are already thinking that way. As Chomsky told that one in his famous interview, the interviewer was saying, "Well, I don't self-censor. I don't," and he said, "Of course you don't. You believe exactly what you're saying. And what I'm saying is, if you had a different thought, you wouldn't have this job." I remember I was at a conference of journalism when they still invited me to those things up in San Francisco a few years ago, and it was being hosted by an Emmy Award-winning journalist from NBC News. And he was saying, I was talking about how they're all pro-war and their editorial meetings. And he said, "Well, Jimmy, what do you think happens at our editorial meetings?" And I said, "I don't know, because I'll never be invited to one of those. And you've been groomed to be sitting in that editorial meeting since you were in kindergarten, and you have no idea that you were." And so those are the two big problems, right? So those people they never colored outside the lines. They always followed the rules. I didn't, which is why I was, my first profession is a comedian, right? I always went against the establishment, always poked holes in the establishment narrative, and I always broke the rules. And that makes me better. And that's why it's easy for me to be a better journalist than the people at NBC, BBC, and likewise. So those are the two problems. They're class loyal. They come from Ivy League institutions now, and they've been groomed that way to be rule followers since they were in kindergarten, and they don't even know it.
It's interesting the way you talk, the way you describe the way journalists used to be, and the pool from which they were once drawn. I mean, way back in 1,000 years ago, I worked on local papers. I was a cub reporter on local weekly papers and was trained there. And I remember when there were journalists who they called it a trade. It wasn't a profession. They actually described it to themselves and each other as a trade. They were therefore tradesmen. They saw themselves as having more in common with people that built things and fixed things.
Yes.
Than they saw them having in common with people who, were the product of university education. And I had forgotten that until you said it. That I think that might be a worthwhile reminder that, that journalism is a trade. It's something of the working people.
Yes, and they try to make it out like it's some kind of highly skilled profession where there are people who are better than others for sure. But I had it described to me one time by an award-winning journalist. He said journalism is just sticking your head down the street and reporting back what you see. That's what journalism is. So anybody can do it, and they don't want you to know that anybody could do it. They want you to think that it has to be a specialized class that gets anointed and has to have a badge, and the establishment has to confirm them. And of course, if you read the New York Times, which they say is the paper of note, they're constantly lying. They're constantly propagandizing. They did an article the other day, seed oils are good for you. And they're constantly doing hit jobs on people like you and me. They did a hit job on YouTube, trying to scare advertisers away because we're their competition. They just did the same thing with Rumble. They just did a hit job on Rumble, and they tried to pretend like it was some kind of right-wing rabbit hole when there's lots of lefty people on there. The Revolutionary Blackout Network is on there. Glenn Greenwald's on there. I'm on there. I'm not a liberal. I'm a lefty. There's a totally different thing. So, again, you don't need a special training or anything. The more you do it, the better you are. But all you need is a good BS detector, and you could be a great reporter. I have a good BS detector, which is what helped make me a successful comedian. And it's the same. I use the same skills in my reporting, and it's not easy. Did you see that CNN just another 100% fake story where they went into a Syrian prison and pretended that there was this guy locked up in a Syrian Dutch pro-war propaganda, that there was a prisoner locked up for 3 months in a cell without a window. And when they came and got him, he looked like his jacket just came out of the dry cleaners. He was perfectly manicured, not a hair out of place. And when he walked outside, he looked straight up at the sun. You can't do that if you've been in a windowless dungeon for 3 months. So, and now they're backtracking. Now they're because it was so obvious. It was so poorly done that everybody saw that it was a lie. And now Anderson Cooper and Brian Stelter and the Clarissa, the woman who did, they're all trying to come up with a believable lie why they got duped. They didn't ask. Go ahead.
This is what I mean. It's like once you've learned how to play, tic-tac-toe, noughts and crosses, you stop playing it once you get to about the age of 7 or 8 because every game plays out the same way. Nobody wins because it's too simple. And yet the propagandizing journalistic profession is still playing noughts and crosses. And the mass of the population are looking at them thinking, well, no, because if I put a zero there, you'll put an X there, and I'll put, it'll be, neither of us will win. But they doggedly persevere, and like you say, that footage of that reporter with the guy out of the Syrian jail leaning on her shoulder. Who do you think's watching this and believing it for what it is? Where so many of us are just watching it, going, yeah, you see what she's doing there. I can see that. I can see central casting, and yet they persevere with it. At what point do they realize no one is believing us anymore?
Well, I'll tell you who believes it. Anderson Cooper believed it as he reported that story, and he celebrated that story. Oh, we have a great reporter, Clarissa Ward's on the ground in Syria, and look at this story. He didn't have one question.
Do they though? Do they believe? Or is that not just his role? Is that not just the function that he performs? Is he not just knowingly thinking, right, here we go, I'll set this up, I'll tee this up for the reporter on the ground, and she'll do her bit, and then we'll come back to the studio and we'll move on to the next.
Well,
nonsense.
It certainly stretches credulity that he did believe that. Anderson Cooper's first job out of college was working at the CIA. So just so you know. He's probably, they're all paid propagandists. They all know better. Of course they know better. And that's why, I always make the case that, of course, Rachel Maddow knows she's lying about Russiagate, knows she's doing pro-war propaganda on Ukraine, that she's doing pro-war propaganda on Syria. She's a Rhodes Scholar. I'm a C student, nightclub comedian, and I know better. Of course she knows better. But you never get in trouble for lying at the behest of the establishment. You get rewarded, right? If you tell the truth, you go to jail. That's Julian Assange wasn't in jail because he lied about the war machine. It was because he told the truth about it. Same thing with Edward Snowden. He's an exile because he told the truth about what the deep state was doing, not because he lied about it. If you lie to the American people at the behest of the establishment, you get a $30 million contract a year, which is what Rachel Maddow got, which is $100,000 a day. That's how much she gets paid to lie to the American people. And people think, well, wait a minute, she's gay. Gay people are born with morals and dignity and character and integrity. They wouldn't lie. Of course, that's why they got her. Chris Hayes is another guy who hosts on MSNBC. He's a bona fide nerd. He even wears glasses. He wouldn't lie to us. He's a nerd. That's exactly why they got those people, because that's good cover for their lies. Just like when people look at Bill Gates, they go, well, come on, he's a nerd. He wears a crew neck sweater and glasses. He wouldn't be a megalomaniac, psychopathic monopolist who wants to control the world, would he? Hey, the devil, when he comes, isn't going to be wearing horns and with a pitchfork. He's going to be wearing glasses and a crew neck sweater.